That was really all they had in common: the cultural identity, the sex, and the seagulls. She tells her husband this story. He asks her what she wants him to say. She tells him to say he is angry that she fucked a Turkish sailor that he wishes he had in the unair-conditioned room near Galata Tower. She tells him to shout it. Her husband refuses to say any of it. His refusal is quiet, itself not angry. When she sees him gazing placidly at her and refusing to say any of these things, she understands that this is his way of getting back at her for fucking the Turkish sailor. And she also understands that this, his lack of passion, his sense of logic, is the reason she fucked the Turkish sailor, and it's also the reason she always comes back home. All right. I'm going to read to you from the last story in the book. It's called The Love, Lives, and Adventures of Zelwa the Hafi. And does anyone know what an ibex is? Ibex? Yeah? What is it? What is it? Yeah, so it's a Middle Eastern goat that stunts and that is just like fancy. So it always finds itself in these precarious ass situations where it's like holding on to like the side of a rocky cliff. It looks like a goat, but it's a gazelle. It has curly horns. So this character is Zelwa the Hafi. All I've ever wanted is to feel whole. When I was a kid, I once surgically sawed my Barbie in half, like a magician. Then I cut photos of myself in two and pasted the top half of my body to the bottom torso and legs of my doll. I brought my new self to bed and said, one day you will have legs and you will be a real human girl. You will be whole. Then I went to sleep and dreamt I was half me and half doll and woke up shrieking. Daddy came to my room and soothed me with a compress and with words. When you're older, I will help you get a human lower half. You will be beautiful then, and you will have no more nightmares and nothing to fear. My name is Zelwa. I'm half woman, the upper half, and half Transjordanian ibex, the lower half. But I've never been east of the Atlantic. As far as I know, my late grandma was the only other half ibex in my family. Nonetheless, there are about 5,000 of us halfies in the country, mostly residing in Wyoming, Montana, Texas, the Bay Area, New York, where no one bats an eye when we trot down the street, our upper bodies suited, our leather briefcases strapped to our furry backs. I've lived in all these places, was born in the Great Plains of Montana, then moved to Wyoming, where my father became a pilot and bought a modest plane, then San Francisco, where my mother fled from him and into a woman's arms, then New York, where I studied law before deciding to move to a tiny Texas town where the residents are used to me and greet me with a, "Hey, Zelwa," and a smile. My father's coming to visit me soon, to convince me to have an operation that will make me all human. Dr. Yumeji, a real-life magician, has been resuscitating and reusing lower human halves for about 3 years, bringing in halfies from all over the world and performing the surgery for an exorbitant sum. Daddy wants to pay for the surgery, but if I do it, I'll insist on paying half. I'm a family attorney. Twice a week, I travel by plane to Houston to defend my clients. I do as an adult the thing I was best at doing as a child. I saw things in half. The mom gets one kid and the dad gets the other, or the kid gets sawed in half and has to spend 1 week with his mother and the next with his other mother, and on until he wakes up in the middle of the night wondering where he is. Once in a while, I saw families so well that couples decide they want to remain bound together. Those are secretly my favorite cases, because while most couples have no business being together, many have no business coming apart. Ibexes were once the supermodels of the Near East, where our fine likeness were painted on vases and water jugs, our horns curling back like shells. Sadly, I do not have horns, but I am horny. As you can imagine, though, I have been single for a while. I have a personals ad up online, but I never use a full body shot for the greeting photo. Sometimes I add it as a 5th or 6th photo, and sometimes I get emails from hot dudes in Dublin or Dubai, emails that read, "Hello there, I love your photos, you're brilliant at Photoshop, keep up the magic." Or I get emails from people who are looking only for BHLs, beautiful half ladies, fucking fetishists. So I prefer to meet people offline. Nowadays, when I go on dates, I drive my disability-equipped van, which allows me to accelerate with my hands and provides my lower body lots of room. But when I was younger, I used to show up at dates' doors, carry them on my back, and gallop off to dinner. This was a problem because it created an intense and too premature sense of intimacy. I figured that out in therapy. Dr. Huai is good for me because she doesn't allow me to use my halfiness as an excuse, and she encourages me to accept it. Her real name is Dr. Rai. When I went in and told her I was considering the surgery, she said, "Why?" "Because I'm sick of feeling different, of being alone," I said. "I think it would be nice to feel whole." "Do you feel unwhole, divided?" I pointed at my hooves and nodded. Dr. Huai stared at me. She enjoys long moments of silence and eye contact. "Something's percolating," she said. "My fear of eye contact and long silences," I said. "Well, what else?" I shifted my eyes to the clock and thought. I knew what she wanted to hear, so I said, "My fear of ending up alone. My fear that people are talking about me behind my furry back. My feelings of inadequacy. My general feeling of difference." She took a deep breath, nodded, and stared into my eyes for like 4 minutes. Then my time was up. I have gone to a couple of self-acceptance conferences for other half-beasts, or halfies as we prefer to call ourselves. Just went to one in Hawaii last summer. It was great and it was not. It was like staring at myself in the mirror for days, but it was also like staring at myself in the mirror for days. I got to see people whose lower halves were too enormous for disability vans, or excessively hairy, or who didn't have human arms at all in addition to their 4 legs, and so had to install hoof-friendly phones. And many of them felt like they could never have a relationship with a non-halfie. The first halfie I slept with had the same exact halves as mine. He was half Transjordanian Ibex, and his human half was the same as mine, Lebanese and Eastern European. I know. We're fucking hot. It's hard to find the right match in general, and so when you limit it to the unmarried halfies over the age of 21, you have 200 halfies to choose from. And let's just say that half of those are, well, not pretty. That leaves 100, and half of them don't read. And half of the remaining 50 don't like women. That leaves 25 halfies, half of whom like Star Trek a little too much and require you to go to Comic-Con with them. Half of the 13 left are vegans and think you should be too. Half of the 6 left are really, really gorgeous and want your human half to be well-toned. And well, I'm an attorney, people, and I have no time for weightlifting, plus it's boring. That leaves 3 dudes who live in Wyoming, and who the fuck wants to live there? And before you accuse me of being too heterocentric, I will come clean and tell you I just could not be with another girl halfie. It's the mirror thing again. Sorry. I have, however, been with some human girls and I liked it. I was label-free for a while, but I came out as bisexual with the help and prodding of Dr. Y. When I told my mom over the phone that I was attracted to my own gender and others, she was very proud and passed the news to my other mom, Milda. Milda cried and said she'd always known, which annoyed the shit out of me because Milda likes to pretend she knows things before she does. This has less to do with her career as an unsuccessful palm reader and tarot card reader than it does with the fact that she's a controlling asshole. Look, I'm working this stuff out with Dr. Rai. Why? I'll spare you. When I called my dad to tell him I liked men, women, and people of all genders, he shouted so hard I was half deaf for a week. It's not enough that you're a halfie? You want to be half gay and half straight too? I took it in stride. My dad is originally from Belarus and has a mustache and doesn't like nonconformism of any kind. Sometimes I think it's a miracle he didn't flee when I was born, my head and chest coming out first, then my hairy ibexian lower half. Instead, he piloted airplanes very far away. Every day, he sublimated his need to escape via flight. That one's all mine. Dr. White didn't help me come up with that one. I remember once I asked him if he loved me in spite of my ibex half, and he looked down at me and said, "Oh, Bobby, you can't help it." After that, anything I could help, he expected me to. On my first date ever, I saw Splash with Rick Bartell, who had won the school science contest 3 years in a row, yet had really nice skin and an inkling of biceps. When we left the theater, he asked me what I thought about the movie. I had heard from my dad that men don't really give a shit about what women think, but I decided that afternoon I would be myself, and therefore Rick Bartell would like me even more. I think it's weird she has to suffer so much before he joins her in the sea. Besides, why do people even think mermaids are sexy? Mermaids don't have pussies. Their legs are fused together into a tail. Rick Bartell looked at me in horror, and I saw my face reflected in his glasses. Black eyes, frizzy brown bangs hanging like an omen over my forehead. I noticed he had a kernel of popcorn stuck in his teeth, really big pores, and those biceps were just the puffs of his down coat. This was a moment of true mutual recognition, the likes of which rarely come. He saw that I was a hangry halfie, and I saw that he was an unattractive science nerd. In such moments of recognition, relationships either blossom or wilt. Ours wilted. It began a sort of rite of passage for me. I would watch Splash with dates and see what they thought of the idea of suffering leading to compromise and why mermaids are considered hot while half ibexes are not. Usually the dates fled. A few stayed and hotly debated how underwater life appeals to people because it frees them from the chains of surface life. One man actually thought mermaids were an incestuous fantasy, that men want to be with women who don't have vaginas, kind of like their ideas of their mommies, and want to live underwater in an amniotic state, suckling on their titties. The first girl I ever went on a date with said, "Don't gender this. Everyone is attracted to mermaids. It's like the veiled temptress or the naked chick in the desert. Everyone likes boobs and long hair and the idea of living in a closed-off culture." Then she leaned in and cupped my boob with one hand and stroked my long hair with the other. See? I enjoyed kissing her because our tongues felt slick against each other's like small fish, and when we made love I exuberantly greeted the tactile sense of wholeness. Unfortunately, I couldn't feel whole for long because she left me for another halfie, a real estate developer who had the top half of a woman and the bottom half of a bull. I went to pick up Daddy at the small local airport, where he was landing his own plane and leaving it for a week, after which he hoped to take me to Montana. As I circled the minuscule building in my huge disability van, I listened to Judy Collins' version of Both Sides Now, and I thought about Dr. Yumeji, the magician. After the operation, I could drive a Mini Cooper. I could buy a pair of jeans. I could listen to better songs. Soon, Daddy appeared on the sidewalk. He was wearing an old beige cowboy hat, a checkered shirt tucked into Wranglers, and a huge belt buckle with an angry buffalo engraved on it. That evening, we played board games and drank tequila. Daddy asked me to do impressions of Milda, whom we both hated. It was nice to share jokes at her expense, but unfortunately, one of the only ways we could laugh together. The next day, Daddy was taking a shower and the devil was beating his wife when the doorbell rang. I rushed to answer it, but there was no one there. I stood on the front porch, a wraparound affair that makes me feel perfectly whole and took a whole year to build, drank my hibiscus tea as the rain wept down from the bright yellow streaked sky. The bathroom door creaked behind me and Daddy walked out, naked and sopping. He drew a sharp breath when he saw me, then ran off to the guest bedroom. "What kind of attorney has no towels in her bathroom?" he shouted as soon as he was safe behind the door. I scrunched my eyes shut, but it was too late. I knew what I'd just seen, the base of a tail, an actual brown, hairy stub of a tail at the top of my daddy's ass crack. I poured the rest of the tea out in the lily patch by my porch, my hand shaking. Daddy and I walked to the taqueria down the street where the owner's 8-year-old kid takes your order and the tacos cost 50 cents a piece, and the walls are covered in an amateur yet moving mural of Monterrey. Daddy, I said, after we'd silently gulped down one taco el pastor each. I don't want to talk about it, he said, and scratched his ear. I suddenly saw his habit of scratching in a new light. But Dad, I want to. I always thought Grandma was the only one like this. He turned away and stared at the mountains, which were depicted in snowy white and muddy brown. Well, you're not, he said. Happy now? Yeah, I am. What happened to your tail? He didn't answer. The 8-year-old waiter came by and refilled our waters. More silence. They killed her, Daddy said. They killed her and chopped my tail off. Who? Who killed Grandma? What does it matter, he shouted. She's gone now, and you will too if you don't take care of this. Up until now, I'd always assumed that my grandma, my babunya, had died of natural causes. Now Daddy had me picturing townspeople carrying torches and machetes. What happened? Talk to me. The past is gone, Zelwa, my father said, his face red hot and his eyes shining. Was she killed because she was half ibex? That would never happen now, I said. Halfies have done a lot since those days. We've gotten a lot of recognition. We're protected by laws. We have rights. It's not true, he said. All that can change. All that can change. Tomorrow we should get on a plane and take you to Montana. You'll get an operation done, and this nightmare will be over. I took a deep breath, shaking and afraid. I'm sorry about what happened to Grandma, but I think this is bullshit. I mean, I'm a grown woman now. I own my own house. I have a good job. I'm successful and happy. Why change who I am? What's wrong with who I am? Everything, he said, and threw his napkin on the table and went out of the taqueria and into the bright street alone. I wanted to run after him and scream, to trample him under my hooves. I wanted to tell him I was beautiful. Of all the people in the world who've pointed and laughed at me, he'd been the first. I trotted home alone and wept past the park, the barbecue hut, the pie company, and the liquor store. I went in and bought a small bottle of tequila, then walked a mile up the road through the gates of the San Jose Cemetery, passing the pink and purple piñatas mourning grandchildren had raised over their dead. I thought of my babunya and saw the dam of the river in the distance and wanted to slip my body into it, bob in the water until it swallowed me up. On my right, a group of goats was grazing a scraggly patch of green. I envied them. In the morning, it was clear Daddy had gone. I fried eggs, downed a glass of OJ, and imagined my father flying. He was wearing a scarf and a flying cap, and he had wings. His wings extended from his chest, their span expansive, and their tips sharp and poised. When I put my dish in the sink, I noticed Daddy's wallet. He must have forgotten it on the wooden chop block. I picked it up and debated whether I should snoop, but decided to go ahead. Inside, a small album flipped open. Me holding BB guns, me hunting, me swimming. In one photo, my father was hugging his mother. I slid that picture out of the wallet's narrow frame and set it on my bookshelf, a place of pride. It took me a week of trotting back and forth to notice, but when I did, there was no mistaking it. Every photograph I'd ever seen of my grandmother was taken from the waist up. This one was no different, but I looked at it closely and saw the patch of fur, barely the size of a fingernail, against the matte photograph, and just behind her, a gleam of white, her lovely Ibexian coat. I thought of Daddy's tail and cried, not because I thought he was right, which is what I used to believe, but because I knew he was hurt. He was scared, and I felt sorry for him. I wish I could tell you that all wounds were healed after that. I wish I could say that I accepted myself unconditionally from that moment on, but it remains a daily effort. I am half human after all. I will tell you this. Less than a year after I found the photograph, I went swimming in the dam and met a woman bathing topless at the wall, the stone place where the river spills onto rocks and disappears. Her left breast was a little larger than her right, and her nipples were flat. A few kids were running across the top of the wall, and she said to me, "Doesn't it look like they're walking on water?" I said it did, and she said she loved how easy the eye is to trick. I dipped my head under the water, but when I came up for air, the bathing woman was gone. When I saw her next, she was lying in the grass by the water, her tail blending into its greenness. I stared at her tail scales and then at her smile, and I galloped out of the water and lay next to her in the grass, next to the mermaid who was still here with me. Mornings, she brews coffee and nags me to buy toilet paper on my way home from work, and I smile at her because everyone knows that halfies don't use the toilet. On Sundays, we do yoga in our backyard. I put my arms over my hooves, and she puts her arms over her scales, and we chant our ohms, she reminding me, there is oneness in duality. Nothing is one and nothing is double. You are both. Then we do our salutations, our bodies mirrors facing the whole and brilliant sun. Thank you.